Some goodbyes don't come with words, but with gestures. A shift in tone, a glance that no longer searches for you, a presence that blends into the background. That's how love begins to die, not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet fade. It's hard to admit, but when someone starts falling out of love with you, you won't always notice right away. On the contrary, you might stay insisting, making excuses, holding on, while on the other side, they've already started packing emotionally, even if they're still under the same roof. In this video, I'm going to show you 7 raw but necessary signs to recognize when love is fading. The last one is the hardest to accept, but also the most freeing if you choose to face it head-on. I'm Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Stick around until the end, because this message might not only open your eyes, but help you reclaim your dignity. Have you ever felt someone speaking to you kindly, but with their soul already closed off? That politeness that seems well-mannered, but is really just an elegant way of saying, "You're no longer in my heart." Because when love starts to die, the first thing that grows cold isn't the voice, it's the gaze. And no matter how much we try to ignore it, we feel it deep down. This is the first symptom and the most deceptive one. When someone falls out of love with you, they become polite, but distant. There are no more complaints, no heated arguments, no tense silences that lead to reconciliation. What's left is a hollow calm, a peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from indifference. Many confuse it with maturity or think the relationship has finally reached a stable place. But it's not stability, it's indifference in disguise. I know the story of Rose, a woman who reached 63 after more than 30 years of marriage. She told me her husband was still polite, that he never raised his voice, that they still sat down together at the table. But when he spoke to her, it was like he was talking to a neighbor. No genuine questions, no real concern, none of that spark of connection that used to unite them even in the simplest things. One day, she admitted she missed the years when they argued, because at least then, there was emotion. There was something worth fighting for. Now she didn't know if she had a husband or just a roommate. This isn't an isolated story. It's a quiet, brutal stage that many people face in their later years when passion is gone and routine becomes an excuse to stop looking each other in the eye. But deep down, something aches. Because the soul, no matter how much it tries to fool itself, always knows when it's no longer important to the other person. Epictetus taught us not to place our peace in someone else's hands. And though that lesson is hard, it's more necessary than ever when you feel love slipping away without warning. Empty politeness is an echo of the past. It sounds familiar, but it's lost its essence. What once was tenderness is now just protocol. What once was closeness is now formality. You, who are listening to me right now, and who may have realized that someone by your side has started treating you with that polite distance, don't ignore that sign. Don't dress it up as respect or mistake it for stability. Real love may have ups and downs, but it is never indifferent. When someone stops loving you, the first thing that changes is the tone, the intention, the warmth that's no longer there. And here's the hard part. You might not be able to do anything to bring that love back. But you can decide what you'll do with that truth. You can stay, waiting, begging for crumbs of affection at a table where they no longer serve you with care. Or you can start to rebuild yourself, to recognize yourself, to give yourself the treatment you've been waiting to receive from others. This isn't about revenge or drama, it's about dignity, because you weren't made to settle for lukewarm presence. You were made to share life with someone who truly sees you, hears you, and chooses you every day. And if that person is no longer there, then it's time to start choosing yourself. Don't be afraid of solitude. Be more afraid of living alongside someone who no longer loves you, but doesn't have the courage to leave. This is only the beginning. What comes next will hurt even more. but it will also open your eyes. Stay with me. If empty politeness was the first sign, what comes next is even more painful because it reveals the breakdown of a deeper connection. We've reached the second key point in this video, when the other person starts avoiding shared silences. It seems minor, almost unnoticeable at first, a subtle shift in the rhythm of conversations. A constant need to fill the space with noise, distractions, activities. But you feel it. You feel that those silences which used to be comfortable, intimate, more meaningful than words, have now become unbearable for the other person. And then you notice they don't want to be with you unless there's something external to distract them. Because when it's just the two of you, no TV, no phone, no visitors, the emptiness becomes obvious. This phenomenon has a very human background. When someone stops loving you, silence becomes a mirror. And no one wants to look into that mirror if they know what they'll see is a relationship that no longer makes sense, a bond that no longer vibrates. So they run. They run from the present moment, from the here and now, because there's nothing left to hold them there. Silence, which was once a nest of peace, turns into the cruelest reminder of what's been lost. In Stoic philosophy, learning to be alone with yourself in silence is a form of freedom. Marcus Aurelius spoke about retreating inward as the only truly unshakable refuge. But when love between two people begins to crumble, one of the clearest symptoms is that the ability to share silence without discomfort disappears, and the one who has stopped feeling affection starts looking for any excuse not to be present. I've seen it countless times. People who no longer sit together for coffee without the TV on. Couples who no longer walk hand in silence like they used to. Children who come to visit but can't put down their phones for 5 minutes because being silent with their mother or father feels heavy. And it hurts, not because of the act itself, but because of what it implies, that your presence is no longer enough. This kind of disconnection has a brutal impact on the soul, because when you can no longer share silence with someone, you're lonelier than you think, even if you live under the same roof. And that loneliness isn't the same as simply being physically alone. It's a much harsher kind of solitude, the feeling of not being seen, not being heard, not being felt by someone who once promised you their company. The mind, especially in old age, craves serenity, but that serenity can't be built if every quiet moment becomes an open wound. When silence stops being a refuge and turns into a threat, the soul begins to weaken. Obsessive thoughts creep in, the feeling of not being enough, the fear of abandonment, even guilt for not knowing what you did wrong. And that's when emotional exhaustion sets in, affecting the body too. Because anxiety doesn't just live in the mind, it also wears down the heart, the muscles, your sleep. The spiritual plays a fundamental role here. Those who have cultivated a rich inner life through prayer, meditation, or philosophical reflection know that shared silences don't need to be filled. On the contrary, they are sacred spaces where two souls can meet without speaking. But if the other person has lost that connection, if they no longer wish to share even silence with you, then you need to ask yourself, why are you still trying to hold on to something that's no longer there? This isn't about dramatizing or giving up. It's about opening your eyes and reclaiming your dignity. Don't get used to begging for company. If shared silence no longer exists, start looking for your own peace. Make the silence yours again. Take it to the park, to prayer, to art, to reading. Rebuild that space the other person now avoids and turn it into your fortress. Because if you can learn to love silence with yourself again, no one will ever make you feel like your presence isn't enough. And if this is hurting, if you're remembering moments when you felt that avoidance, that escape disguised as distraction, don't turn this video off. What's coming next will be even clearer. And maybe what you need isn't to save that relationship, but to save yourself. When silence is no longer a refuge but a void, what comes next cuts even deeper. We've reached the third point of this video, and this is where things start to shift inside you if you dare to see what's right in front of your eyes. They hear you, but they don't listen. And you know it. You talk, you share. You try to open your soul in conversations that once meant something, but now your words bounce back. They don't land. It's like throwing stones into the sea. They disappear without a trace. This change is devastating because it strikes at one of the deepest human needs, especially as we grow older, to be recognized, not just seen, but felt at the soul level. In later years, when your children stop asking how you're doing and friendships start to fade, one of the last ways you feel you exist is knowing that someone truly listens to you. When that's gone too, something inside begins to dim. From a Stoic perspective, the true value of a conversation lies in its authenticity. Seneca spoke about the importance of choosing our words carefully, not out of vanity, but out of respect for our own soul and the soul of the other. If what you say is no longer received with attention, it's because your presence no longer matters to them. And though it hurts, you need to start paying attention to that sign, not to get revenge, not to speak louder, but to redirect that energy back to yourself, to what you can build within you. The strategy that can make all the difference here is simple, but powerful. Stop speaking to someone whose soul is no longer open to you, and start speaking to yourself, listening to yourself, writing down your thoughts, praying with honesty, telling yourself all those things you've been waiting for the other person to validate. Because when you talk to yourself with love and truth, your self-worth no longer depends on anyone else's ears. Imagine you have a garden, and every time you water a plant, that plant doesn't bloom, doesn't bear fruit, doesn't even respond to your care. How long would you keep watering it? There comes a point when you have to accept that some roots are dry, that some connections are no longer going to give life, and that your responsibility is to tend to what can still flourish. You. When someone no longer listens to you, when their eyes no longer light up at your stories, when their heart no longer opens to your emotions, then stop insisting. Don't wear yourself down, because every word you give without a response is a wound you inflict on yourself. The strategy is to withdraw emotionally from that barren space, not to give up, but to plant yourself in fertile ground. Your own growth, your faith, your projects, your real connections. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel and hit like if these words are resonating with what you're living through. Let me know in the comments what country you're listening from and write a simple but powerful phrase, "I choose to care for myself." Because there are still important lessons ahead in this video, and the last one will be the hardest, but also the most necessary to reclaim your dignity. After realizing that your words no longer matter, that your voice is lost on ears that only listen out of obligation, you reach a point where something inside you begins to break. And that's when the next wound appears, one of the most silent and destructive. We've reached the fourth point of this video. They grow impatient with your presence. You notice it in the smallest details. A deep breath when you walk into the room, quick eye movements when you take your time telling a story, a gesture of annoyance when you approach to ask for something simple. It's no longer just about not being heard. Now, being around you feels like a burden to them. And here's where a mental trap catches many people over the age of 55, believing that change in attitude is your fault. You tell yourself maybe you talk too much, maybe you repeat things, maybe you've run out of interesting topics. You start to censor yourself, to shrink, to make yourself invisible so you won't bother. This mistake is deadly because it makes you complicit in your own emotional abandonment. And the worst part is, it disguises itself with twisted logic. I don't want to be a burden. Maybe I'm overreacting. At my age, I can't expect that much attention. But no, that voice isn't wisdom or humility. It's the result of years of wear and tear, of not setting boundaries. The problem isn't that you're annoying. The problem is that the person who stopped loving you no longer has the will to see your worth, and you start buying into that lie. When you allow someone else's impatience to define your value, you lose more than self-esteem. You lose your inner voice, your spontaneity, your right to exist with dignity. You begin to live as if walking on eggshells, avoiding speaking, avoiding asking, avoiding being yourself, and that self-censorship slowly erodes your joy for life. You fade not because the body ages, but because the soul feels out of place, in your own home, in your own life. From a Stoic point of view, this is unacceptable. Marcus Aurelius said, "Dignity consists in being worthy of yourself." You don't need to prove yourself to anyone else. If someone can no longer tolerate your presence, the issue isn't who you are. It's their gaze, clouded by frustration, by habit gone stale, by a loss of respect. Because when someone grows impatient with you, they're no longer seeing the person you are. They're projecting their dissatisfaction onto you, and you have no reason to carry that weight. Spirituality teaches us something crucial too. Each of us is a temple of the Spirit. Your presence at any age is sacred. You're not here to be merely tolerated, you're here to live fully. Don't let someone else's attitude convince you that you're dispensable. And if right now you're recalling those cold reactions, those gestures of impatience, that way they've made you feel like a burden, then it's time to make an internal decision. You can't change the other person, but you can reclaim your space, your voice, your right to exist without apologizing for it. You're not here to diminish yourself, you're here to rise, even if you have to do it alone. Because dignity, when it blooms in adversity, becomes a light no one can extinguish. And that's the light we'll keep igniting in the next few minutes. Because if you think this has been powerful, just wait. What's coming will be even more revealing. We've arrived at the 5th point in this video, and what I'm about to tell you may hurt more than everything we've talked about so far, because it means looking back and realizing how many times you've allowed it without even noticing. They start talking more about themselves and less about us. Maybe at first you didn't catch it. Maybe you thought it was normal, that after so many years people change, that everyone needs their space. But over time, that way of speaking turns into a clear message. They're no longer including you in their future, and the most devastating part is that you're still there, trying to keep the connection alive, while on their end, they're already planning a life where you're just a shadow from the past. When a relationship begins to fall apart, the first thing to disappear is the we. It's no longer we'll go, but I'll go. There are no more shared plans, just solo decisions. It's all about individual projects, personal dreams, their own time. And you, who once were central to their life, now barely show up as a footnote. It's not just a matter of words, it's a sign that they no longer see you as a partner, but as a background presence. And if you don't act, that disconnection deepens until it becomes total indifference. The most common mistake is justifying this behavior, thinking it's just a phase, that everyone becomes more introspective over the years, that maybe you should do the same. But this isn't introspection, it's emotional detachment. And if you don't face it in time, you get pulled into a dynamic where you lose your voice, your identity, your autonomy. You stop making decisions, stop expressing desires, stop imagining a different future. You become someone who simply waits to see what the other person wants so you can adjust. And living like that, in silence and resignation, only feeds frustration, emotional dependence, and most of all, the loss of respect. Because when someone stops including you in their plans, they're not expecting you to adapt. They're telling you that you're no longer part of what's ahead. This situation can be reversed, but not with sweet words or pleas. It's reversed with a shift in mindset, with the kind of stoic clarity that allows you to see reality as it is, without sugarcoating, without excuses, without romantic illusions that no longer apply. If someone no longer includes you in their life, you don't have to keep begging for a place in it. Stoic philosophy teaches us we don't control other people's actions, but we do control our response. And your response must be strong, calm, and dignified. Pull back emotionally from the space where you're no longer welcome. Start rebuilding your I without relying on a we that no longer exists. Take back your life's project, your decisions, your personal power. This won't be easy, I know, especially if you've spent decades sharing life with someone. But easy is not the same as impossible. And at this stage, you're not here to live halfway or to wait for crumbs of belonging. You're here to thrive, even if that means doing it alone. Because in that solitude, if you live it with awareness, with spirituality, with purpose, you can find more peace than in false companionship. And trust me, that's worth far more than pretending everything's fine when deep down, you know it's not. Stay with me. What's coming next won't just reveal more signs. It'll open a door you may have forgotten you're still able to walk through. After seeing how you've been slowly erased from their words, from their plans, from the life you once shared, you can't keep telling yourself that everything's fine. It's not. And if you don't acknowledge it now, each passing day will make it harder to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your peace. We've arrived at the 6th point in this journey, and it might be the most brutal so far. They start comparing you to everything they once defended. This isn't just painful, it's a deep, emotional betrayal. The very things they used to value in you, your patience, your outlook on life, your humor, your little gestures, suddenly become flaws. All at once, what they once admired, they now criticize, and their tone no longer seeks to help, but to discredit. And they do it without hesitation, without filter, as if wounding you doesn't matter anymore. That's what happens when love dies. There's a need to justify the detachment, and to do that, they begin to change how they see you, not because you've changed, but because they need reasons not to feel guilty for pulling away. Picture this. You're in the living room, preparing something you used to do together, something done with love. Maybe it's a meal, a song, a simple activity. And they respond with a cold, dismissive comment. You always do the same thing. Or worse, they use you as an example of what they don't want to be. That's not constructive criticism. It's the reflection of a heart that no longer wants to build anything with you. And if, in that moment, you don't stop and recognize what's happening, you'll keep feeding a dynamic where you become the target of their frustrations. So many people over 55 fall into a fatal trap here. They start believing those comparisons. They question their worth, their past decisions, their very way of being. They start changing to please, fixing what isn't broken, turning themselves into a shadow of who they really are, all to avoid losing the other person. And that's not just humiliating, it's self-destructive. Because you end up losing the one thing you still have when others' love fades, your self-respect. Stoic philosophy urges us to observe with detachment, with the firmness of someone who doesn't need anyone else's gaze to know their worth. Seneca said, "He who respects himself does not lower himself to fit in." And you, if you're listening to this with a heart bruised by years, by rejection, by constant comparisons, you need to hear this. You are not here to let someone else reshape you to fit their whims. You're here to live with strength, with faith, with dignity. Now I want you to picture your life 5 years from now if you do nothing. If you keep letting that voice compare you to ghosts, to impossible ideals, to people who don't know your story, what will be left of you if you allow every word from them to carry more weight than your own conscience? What will be left of your essence if you live under the judgment of someone who no longer sees you as a partner, but as an obstacle? Sooner or later, that situation drains you. It leaves you with no desire to speak, to share, to dream. And guilt eats away at you because you start to believe the problem is you. But it's not. The real problem is that you haven't stepped out of that emotional manipulation disguised as honesty. And yes, walking away hurts. But staying, doing nothing, hurts even more. Because there's nothing sadder than growing older feeling like you're not enough. Not for anyone, not even for yourself. Stay with me until the end. The final sign won't just confirm what, deep down, you already know. It might also hand you the key you've been searching for to close that door once and for all. And finally, begin again. If you've made it this far, you can't keep hiding. You've already seen how the language changes, how you're erased from the plans, how what was once admired has now become a source of contempt. And yet, you might still be there, waiting for a clear sign, a definitive word, something that bluntly tells you you're no longer part of the story. But that's not going to come, because we've reached the 7th point in this journey, and the hardest truth of all is this. They say goodbye without words, but with actions. This is the cruelest farewell, the one that isn't announced, the one that doesn't end with noise but leaves you shattered inside. There's no, I don't love you anymore. No, I'm leaving. No closure. Just a routine where the other person is no longer there, even though they're still sitting next to you. It's the silent goodbye of someone who has already left emotionally but keeps sharing physical space out of convenience, fear, or comfort. And you notice it in the lack of interest, in the way they avoid eye contact, in the excuses to avoid spending time with you, in the decisions made without you. And the worst part is, you deny it. You tell yourself maybe they're busy, tired, going through a phase, but no. The truth is, they're no longer with you, and deep down, you know it. This is where most people break, because it's easier to live with a lie than to face loneliness. But what you're not seeing is that you're already alone. Even if that person sleeps beside you, even if you're still signed as a couple, even if you still show up together at social events, that presence is a ghost. And if you're still waiting for an explanation, a pending conversation, an apology, you're fooling yourself. There are moments when there's nothing left but to accept, and this is one of them. Because if you don't face the truth, you won't be able to make the decision your soul needs in order to heal. Transformation doesn't start with the other person. It doesn't start with a promise or a reconciliation. It starts when you decide to stop lying to yourself. When you stop making excuses and acknowledge that you've witnessed your own abandonment. And I don't just mean their abandonment. I mean how you've abandoned yourself out of fear, out of routine, out of avoidance. The only way out of this emotional prison is to own your part. You can't change what they've done, but you can decide that you're no longer going to tolerate the intolerable. Stoic philosophy doesn't try to comfort you with sweet words, it seeks to free you with truth. And the truth is this: if someone has left, let them go. If someone no longer loves you, don't beg. If someone has made you feel like a burden, let them go before you start believing you don't deserve better. Because you do deserve better, not out of vanity, not out of pride, out of dignity. Because this stage of your life isn't meant for begging for affection. It's meant for walking firmly, with faith, with a peace that only comes when you decide to close the door on what no longer holds you up. Don't keep waiting for words that will never come. The actions have already spoken. And now it's up to you to respond with action. Are you going to stay there, repeating the same pattern? Or are you going to make the decision that could change everything? The answer is in your hands. No one's coming to save you. And if you understand that, then you're one step closer to starting over, not from resentment, but from self-love. That's what's coming next. And I promise you, it's stronger than any goodbye. If you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. Very few people have the courage to face what hurts, to accept that love also ends, that the signs were always there. You just didn't want to see them. You've listened to each of these truths without looking away, and that already says something about you. You're not here looking for easy comfort or empty phrases. You're here because deep down, you know something has to change. Because continuing like this, staying silent, adapting, giving up your space, is costing you your peace, your joy, and most importantly, your dignity. Today, I've told you hard truths, but necessary ones, not to make you suffer, but to wake you up. No one is going to save you if you don't take the first step. Emotional silence, coldness, indifference, and disdain disguised as politeness. These are not love. They're elegant ways of saying, you don't matter to me anymore. And if you're still waiting for one more sign, you're denying yourself the chance to start. Over with strength, with clarity, and above all, with self-love. Let me tell you this clearly and firmly, what comes next won't depend on them. It will depend on you. You don't need anyone's validation to begin your rebirth. All you need is will. I'm Gabriel, and this space, the Stoic Garden, exists for one simple reason. Because you deserve a place where you're told the truth, without sugarcoating, but with purpose. Because you didn't come to this stage of your life to survive broken relationships. You came to live with purpose, autonomy, and faith. If this video stirred something inside you, leave a comment. I am my best company, and tell me which country you're listening from. I want to know who the brave ones are, the ones willing to face their story and transform it. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Here we don't hand out self-help speeches dressed up as philosophy. Here we speak clearly, with the strength of those who've been hurt but chose to heal with dignity. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. You never know how much good you can do with one truth said at the right time. Stay a little longer. I'm leaving you with 2 videos that can be the perfect continuation of what you've just started to understand. Because this doesn't end here. On the contrary, it's just beginning.